I just have to apologize to start with because I got a really bad cough. So I hope I can manage. I've got a big glass of warm Ribena here, so hopefully it can subdue it. Okay, so can suffering advance God's providence? In Romans 5, 3-5, St. Paul says, we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, but because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So he's saying basically that character suffering can help develop character. As you know, Simon isn't here, is he, right? But he's always making fun that I say that life was suffering. Do you remember? But there were people before me who have said the same thing, right? I'm not the only one who said that. There was Buddha, he's quite an important guy. Arthur Schopenhauer, from another. Maybe more recently, Jordan Peterson, and a lot of other people. Suffering builds character, it's true. But I want to look beyond that. From March 20th to April the 10th, 1992, the Collegiate Association for the Research of Principles, CARP, held 21 simultaneous Divine Principle workshops for high school teachers and students from throughout the Commonwealth of the Independent States, then called the CIS, which were former Soviet nations who then separated from the Soviet Union when communism collapsed. And these workshops were held on the Black Sea with about 7,000, well, not about, but exactly 7,229 participants over that 21-day period. It's quite an incredible achievement. So people were called from all over Europe and United States to help. I found myself on a train from Moscow to Simferopol on the Crimean Peninsula, and it took 22 hours to go on that journey. I hadn't prepared for that. I hadn't thought about that even. And the train chugged along at 50 miles an hour, for days it seemed almost. And one brother from our church who was from America, from American CARP, he became my roommate at the seminar venue. And on his train trip down to the Crimean Peninsula, it was a sleeper train, he had a dream. And in this dream, his young daughter, who was about 3 years old, fell off a very high ledge. And in the dream, he screamed, and he tried to catch her, but he couldn't. And in the real world, he leant out of his bunk, fell out of his bunk, and then he hit a metal shelf and broke 2 ribs and smashed his kneecap. And you can imagine he was really shocked by that experience, and also really worried about his daughter, so much so that he went to all kinds of extremes to try and ring back to America to make sure his daughter was okay. And at that workshop, there were 21 workshops, and in our group there were 350 children, high school children and teachers. And I had a group of 30 students and 3 teachers in my group in that workshop. And one morning, on about the 3rd day, I had a vision during one of the lectures. And the lecture was augmented by slides projected onto a large screen at the front, much bigger than this. And there was a big slide of Jesus. And as I was looking at the slide, it suddenly turned into a 3-dimensional image. And Jesus turned around and he faced the lecturer and said to him, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." That's from John 15:13. And you can imagine I was sitting there looking at that, and I was so amazed and surprised and wondered what it meant. And I was really sort of thinking, what does that really mean? So later I went to the sister who was the mother of the workshop. She was like somehow taking charge of taking care of all the details. Her name was Traudl Byrne, And she was actually the wife of Schonborn, who was a Catholic priest from Ireland, who was teaching in our seminary in the United States. A very, very beautiful sister, actually, a very nice sister. And she said also that she'd been thinking about Jesus and how we had to try to make more of an offering of ourselves to the guests. And she asked me, who is Jesus? What did he really do? Of course, actually, he sacrificed his life for us, right? He didn't have any hatred for the people who were persecuting him. He just loved them. And we have to become like that ourselves, right? And Jesus is asking us to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of these young children, she said, and for these teachers. And she looked at me and said, well, can we do that? Can you do that? Can I do that? Really? I didn't know what to say, really. Up until then, I'd just been having a kind of amazing experience, flown to Moscow, saw Red Square, jumped on this train, gone to the Crimea. Thousands and thousands of students and teachers were hearing the Divine Principle. It was just amazing. I thought, wow, incredible. So many people have come to hear the Divine Principle. But then when she said that, I realized, yeah, actually, I've got a very serious responsibility. And we all have in this workshop. We can't just blithely expect things to happen easily. And anyway, we carried on teaching and ran this workshop. And towards the end of the seminar, I had a dream this time. And in my dream, our team was sitting by a river, and we were eating a picnic lunch. And in the river, there were these beautiful golden carp. They were quite small, well, comparatively about this big. And they were swirling around in the water as if it was feeding time. They were like hungry, waiting for food. And we were eating our meal, and we were just throwing a few crumbs to them. We were sitting and upping, and we just saw them, just a few crumbs here and there. We weren't giving them our meal, just, a few crumbs. And behind these carp, in a big lake next to the river, there was a huge carp, as big as this room, basically. Gold and shining, a fantastic color, amazing kind of fish. And it was swimming round and round as if it was kind of waiting for us to do something. And then I woke up. So you can imagine, I thought, oh my gosh, what's this, So I went to Troudel-Byrne, and told her what I'd dreamt about. And we came to the conclusion that what it really meant was that on our team, there weren't enough of us willing to give enough. Feeding these fish, these young carp students, right, meant giving them spiritual food, not physical food. When you have a dream like that, it's always symbolic. It's never real, right? So we're not giving them enough physical food in the dream, but it meant not enough spiritual food. And that we had to have the heart of really giving everything of ourselves. And she said that, maybe we need to pray together. So she and myself and the workshop lecturer got together, and we prayed more deeply. And we were trying to understand, what does this really mean? How can we really try to bring the members who are on the workshop to some point where we can all feel that we really want to give our lives for the sake of the children, to pay some price for them, even in heart. We wanted to, we were thinking maybe we can be like Abraham, offering his son, and then, through this sacrifice, God can work, or something like that. Anyway, we talked about it more afterwards, and Troudel said, yeah, this is actually a problem, because we're all a bit immature, in our movement. We were quite young then, right? So that was 92. How old was I? I was 36, okay. I was not so young, but anyway, I was quite young. Maybe in my spiritual maturity, right? And, she said quite a lot of our members are quite young and immature, quite stuck in a way. And quite often our value comes from our mission or our job. I do this, I'm a that. I'm doing this thing here and I'm doing that thing there, or I'm really good at this, or I'm good at that. And, I'm doing this particular thing, or I got this particular aim or goal. And so our value comes from our job and, what we do, right? What we do, not who we are. And because of this, in a way, behind all of that, there's a kind of insecurity in ourselves. We have a sort of insecurity. We don't really know who we are. We don't know that we are really the children of our heavenly parent, God. We're his sons and daughters. We don't feel that deeply. And in a way, because we feel like that, we're like servants. That is, the position of a servant is somehow insecure. The servant does this job for the master, and that's where their value comes. Their value doesn't come in any other way, right? Not really having a relationship with the people who are responsible for us, Father and Mother Moon or our heavenly parent. And because we have this kind of servant's feeling, then we are distanced, from our real parent. We're a servant, not a son or a daughter. For example, suppose you have a little son or daughter, and he or she brings their friend home. And, your son may feel that he's your son, and you can love him because he's your son. And he receives that love from you as his son, as your son. But his little friend doesn't know that he's your son. He's not your son. So because he doesn't feel like he's your son, even though you can love him with a parental heart, he can't actually receive it. You understand? It's actually depends on your level where you're at, what you can receive from God, right? So if you're immature or you're in this kind of servant position, doing things, value from things and doing things, then it's very difficult to connect in heart to God or our true parents. And, the problem with our spiritual children, people we try to raise up or the people we meet or connect with through the day and through the weeks, is not that they've got fallen nature or they have problems, but that they don't really know that we're their parents. They don't feel that we're their parents because we can't give them God's love. They can't receive that love. We can't give our spiritual children God's love, so they can't be free to come to us to give us their problems, right? They can't really relate to us. And the more that we are able to do that, the more that we're able to be parents to them and love them, and the more they grow and connect with us, the more they can feel that we're their parents and that we're taking care of them, and they can feel God's love through us. So she felt that there was a big problem in that way in our movement at that time, and I think there probably was. And we felt this very deeply at the time in this workshop. The problem was that we couldn't really give that love to everyone in the workshop. We couldn't help them feel that love. That's what we really had to do. So the day, after sitting down and talking about that, and after we realized that, some workshop members went out on a sightseeing trip, some of the young kids. And in this trip, one group of children, 4 children who were in the group of my roommate, the one who had the dream about his young daughter, decided that they wanted to go further on into the mountains behind the workshop center. And there were some very beautiful mountains in that area. And the main group stayed looking at a castle quite nearby, but 4 of them went up the mountain, kept on going up. And 2 of them got separated. And finally, there was a boy and a girl who went higher still into this mountain. And in the end, the boy lost the girl. And he didn't know where she was. And it got very misty and foggy. She couldn't see where she was going. And in the end, what happened was that she slipped off the mountain and she fell off a cliff. And as she was falling, she grabbed hold of a tree or a branch that was sticking out from the side of the cliff. And she managed to hold on to it, but she was hanging above a huge abyss. And she couldn't pull herself up, and she started to scream. But nobody heard her. Finally, somebody heard some screaming in the distance, and they thought something's happening, so they started running towards that direction. But they were very far away, and they tried to reach her, but they couldn't reach her in time. And in the end, she had to let go. And she fell, she crushed her cranium, broke her pelvis, punctured her stomach area, and the next morning she died. So you can imagine, we were all, totally shocked about this. Shocked and traumatized. All the children in her class were all crying, the teachers were crying. And the workshop stopped for a day. As we tried to help the girl's family, we called them and they had to come. and deal with everyone's emotions and the whole circumstance of the whole thing. And of course, as staff, we realized why she died. Right? It's because we really couldn't give enough. And I'll explain this in a minute. She was the price to pay as a ransom for many, as it says in the Bible. And we found out later that the girl was an exemplary student in her class, pure and very capable. But, how does that work? How does that actually work? You might think, what's the mechanics of that? Can suffering advance God's providence in that way? How does suffering advance God's providence? How does it work? Well, we only have to look at the divine principle to understand some points. This is in the introduction to Restoration. I'll just read it to you. It's just a small section. Immediately after the fall, when Adam and Eve had the original sin, but had not yet committed any subsequent good or evil deeds, they found themselves in the midway position, a position between God and Satan, where they were relating with both. So I don't know how you take the story of the fall if you're not a Unification Church member, but you can take it as an allegory if you want, but it's a good allegory. Personally, I think it's real. So how does God separate Satan from fallen people who stand in the midway position? Saying people are in a sort of midway position between God and Satan. We were created by God, but we're influenced by Satan. So there's kind of a stuck in the middle. Satan relates with them on the basis of his connection with them through lineage. Therefore, until people make a condition through which God can claim them as his own, there is no way God can restore them to the heavenly side. On the other hand, Satan acknowledges that God is the creator of human beings. Unless Satan finds some condition through which he can attack a fallen person, he also cannot arbitrarily claim him for his side. Therefore, a fallen person will go to God's side if he makes good conditions, and to Satan's side if he makes evil conditions. You got that? Right? So someone has to create the condition where God can claim people to his side. Yeah, that's the point. So if somebody's working for God as a prophet or a saint or whatever, to bring people to God's side, they have to pay a kind of a price. There has to be something given to show Satan that these people are good and this good effort has been made and that there's no claim on those people. In the workshop, we wanted to bring a lot of people to God's side. At 15 or so workshop staff in that group of 350 people, so we're 15 staff to 315 people in our little workshop, well, big workshop. We should have, from our hearts, been able to fulfill our responsibility to make strong devotional offerings and love and sacrifice our time and make a huge effort for the young people there. But simply speaking, we were just too immature to do that. That was the bottom line. We sat around thinking about it, trying to work out what it all meant, sort of understood what it meant, but then we didn't do anything, really. Let's look at Jesus. In the divine principle, it explains Jesus, who came as God's only begotten Son and the Lord of glory, was not meant to walk a path of suffering. Rather, it was for John the Baptist, born with a mission to make straight the way of Jesus, to go through such tribulations instead of Jesus. However, because John did not complete his responsibility, Jesus had to undergo suffering in John's place. Right? That's how we understand what happened with Jesus. And in a way, in that workshop, we were like John, unable to fulfill our responsibilities. So someone very pure or better than us had to kind of pay a price. She was a good girl with tremendous potential. And all the goodness and potential that would have come from her life afterwards, you can imagine, because she could have done some very good things. All that potential and goodness was used by God for the workshop participants. It's like a kind of a big bowl of goodness that was then taken from her life, which would have been, and then used then for these workshop participants as a price. So this girl had to pay the price of love and sacrifice that 15 of us together should have paid but couldn't. Or maybe she paid the price that all 300 staff on all these 21 workshops should have paid for the 7,200 odd students and teachers. Maybe it was like that. But, we can look at it more broadly. At that workshop, the lecturer was the national leader of Ukraine. And he was actually a British member. And the people in our workshop were all of those from Kyiv. Right? The workshop was being held in the Ukraine on the Crimean Peninsula, which you all have heard about now from the news. And if you look at Ukrainian history, it has an incredible history of suffering. They were the first to bring the Orthodox Church to the whole of the Russian Empire as it was then, or even before the Russian Empire developed. In 988 AD, the Ukrainian king Vladimir received a revelation that he had to gain some religion. He wasn't particularly religious. So he invited Jewish Orthodox and Christian bishops to come to teach him their religion. And he listened very carefully, and eventually he basically chose the Orthodox Church. And he adopted it as the national religion, and everyone became Orthodox. And from then onwards, missionaries went out to Russia. As you know, Ukraine has suffered a lot. So they're standing in a certain special position. There was a Mongol invasion in the 14th century. The Mongolian hordes coming over. And Kyiv was besieged, and out of 50,000 inhabitants, only 2,000 survived. Russia later took over Ukraine, and in 1 year between 1932 and 1933, between 7 and 10 million Ukrainians died in the Holodomor, which is the name for the man-made famine, which was created under Stalin's repression. That's an incredible number of people, right? And also as a result of the April 1986 Chernobyl disaster, 350,000 people had to be relocated. And many suffered side effects because of that. And the World Health Organization estimated that a total of up to about 4,000 people would eventually die of radiation exposure because of the problems there. And now what's happening? Ukraine is fighting against Russian invasion. And everyone's worried about a third world war breaking out. In the Divine Principle, it says, the world wars have taken place to fulfill the worldwide indemnity condition to restore God's sovereignty. The restoration of this world requires that it first be divided into Cain-type and Abel-type worlds, and that there will be 3 final wars in which the heavenly Abel-type world prevails over the satanic Cain-type world. And after that, the world of God's sovereignty can be established. So we can see that, at the end of the Second World War, the world was divided into communism and the free world. And we've been struggling ever since, really. We never really solved that problem. Russia, North Korea, China still remained communist for a long time. And of course, Russia's lost that communism. The Chinese sort of have in some way, but haven't. North Koreans haven't. And it's still there. There's still something going on there. And this situation has to be resolved, right? Ukraine has paid a very high price for the advancement of God's providence in Eastern Europe, and in Russia we can see that price they paid. And now actually the Western European Christian nations need to support them in that endeavor by making sacrifices as well. It's very important actually that the European Christian nations, even though we're losing our Christianity very quickly and our religiosity as a whole, it's very important that we unite together and support them to stand up against this problem. So anyway, it's a good thing to think about, right, when we pray in the mornings. And also, we can understand a little bit more, in a way, the mechanics of how making an offering can really help God's providence to develop. And that we can't develop things, we can't develop goodness unless a certain kind of offering is made for God. So when we have a small workshop, or when we have a meeting, or when we do good things, we always have to think it's very important to make some kind of offering and some condition. And the principle teaches that if we make an offering of ourselves before the time, it can be lesser indemnity. It's called lesser indemnity. You can read about that in the principle. But if we wait till later, there's a higher price that has to be paid, and it's a greater price, right? Okay, thank you very much. So please just join me in prayer. Heavenly Parent, thank you so much for this day, this time we're in. We're coming up to the end of 2022, which is a very key turning point. And Father, we really hope that European community can really work together for goodness. And even on the world level, people can really realize they need to offer and sacrifice things. And thank goodness in the climate discussions in Egypt, the developing nations sort of agreed to offer the money that they'd gained over all these years of industrialization to help the struggling nations due to climate change. Father, those people on the side of goodness really need to make more effort, and I really pray that you can guide all of us in whatever level we're at, whatever we're doing, that we can be able to make this condition through which you can work and be successful. Please be with us this week, and pray this in the name of Timothy Reed, Central Blessed Family, Jude.